doctor on board?
This is the third time we hear the captain's message repeated on the plane's intercom. You don't realize it at the time, but if nobody gets up to do something, a woman seated in the back of this plane will die in the next 60 seconds. What happens next has never been done before, especially not at 40,000 feet in the air. The back of this plane is converted into a surgical suite, and an operation was done in an attempt to save her life. To get a sense of what was available and what was not, note that a 5-star brandy was used as disinfectant in this situation. You may not realize it, but stepping on a plane is incredibly dangerous. You may feel like Earth is right below your feet, but when an emergency happens, you might as well be on Mars. Disconnection, desolation,
Isolation.
heart attack? Nope, the seatbelt sign is on. Massive headache? Yeah, right. There's nowhere to go. Seizure? Sir, please, just shake violently within the confines of your seat. Don't disturb the other passengers, please. Thank you very much. No 911, no ambulance, no hospital. You are 1/6 of the way to outer space after all. Don't worry, you have your little plastic cup of water, a little bag of pretzels, little crumbs inside. You'll be fine. You look around the steel cage and you thank God you're not alone. Your eyes well up with tears as you imagine the collective kindness and intelligence of all your fellow passengers.
Help! Now!
Yeah, never mind. 90% will have no applicable or practical skill to help you. 60% are probably idiots. The real question, is there a doctor on board? For the poor woman in our story, seated among the 400 people traveling from Hong Kong to London, there were actually 2. And even more fortunately, they weren't psychiatrists or people pretending with, like PhD degrees or something. One was an orthopedic surgeon and the other was a senior house officer in medicine. To understand exactly what had brought this woman to death's door, where emergency surgery with a coat hanger was necessary, we had to start from the very beginning. Paul Dixon, a 39-year-old mother to 3, was on the back of a motorcycle driven by her soon-to-be fiancé, Thomas Gelster, 30-year-old company textile executive. They were on the way to drop her off at the airport when suddenly a car pulls into their lane. They crash, and Paul Dixon is sent flying in the air, landing in the hood of the car. Does she go to the hospital afterwards? Nope. She says, I'll just pop a couple of painkillers. What's the worst that could happen, right? Indeed, a few choice words. What is the worst that could happen? Now, by herself on the plane, Paul's arm was getting more swollen and unbearably painful. A nearby flight attendant notices and makes the first announcement. Moments later, the 2 good doctors show up. A non-displaced forearm fracture is promptly diagnosed. Based on the contours of the arm, the doctors surmised that the bones were still likely in correct anatomic alignment. A flexible splint was found from a first aid kit to secure her arm, and a Hong Kong newspaper was used as padding. All in a good days of work. The doctor sat down to enjoy the first meal of the flight. Meatloaf and peas. All was well. Now, this is usually the part where your mind starts to wander and the itchiness of boredom takes over. The worst that usually happens is you inexplicably find yourself next to an incessantly crying baby. And all you can do to preserve your sanity is to fantasize about all the different ways in which you can throw that little dude out the window without anyone noticing. Unfortunately, there are no babies around. Only Paul Dixon. Only Paul Dixon. Only Paul Dixon. The airplane stewardess notices again she is unwell. Only 45 minutes had passed from when the doctors saw her last. The last morsels of that delicious meatloaf and peas had just slid into the doctor's stomachs. At this point, they are notified that Paul was looking gravely ill. A few moments earlier, while bending down to take off her shoes, Paul notices an unbearably, breathtakingly sharp chest pain for the very first time. Examining her chest at that moment would have revealed tenderness to the lower left rib cage. We now know in retrospect that those were rib fractures, sustained in her recent motorcycle injury. Why was this injury just only noticed? You may be familiar with just how little room you get in these airplane seats. And Paul, she was seated all all the way in the back of the plane. She was having a hard time reaching her feet while balancing this new newspapery splint on her arm. Even for an average, able-bodied individual of average plumpness, for them to be able to reach down and take off their shoes without disturbing their neighbors likely requires a certain Cirque du Soleil-like contortional skills. By bending forward in this manner, Paul forcibly compresses her chest against her thighs, newly displacing and further damaging the already weakened and fractured ribcage. She unknowingly pushes the broken fragments out of alignment and transforms them into sharp, jagged daggers, now casually pointing towards the inside of her chest cavity. All it takes is one more breath. With the next inhalation, these broken daggers stab directly into Paul's lungs. While nobody wants to be stabbed by their own broken ribs, what actually makes the situation 1,000 times more deadly is the fact that she is 40,000 feet in the air. Being so high up, the air becomes incredibly thin. There are two main issues with this. One, there's very low oxygen when you're so high up. And two, there's very low air pressure.
Why is that? Air, believe it or not, actually has weight and substance, and just like all things on Earth, is pulled towards on the surface by gravity. As a result of this, air molecules on the surface of the planet are much more densely packed than air molecules closer to outer space. The rich layer of oxygen close to the surface is what we as human beings are used to. Breathing in this nicely crowded and oxygenated space is good. Going for at least 1,000 feet into the sky and leaving the space is bad, and even worse is than going to stab yourself in the lung while you're there. Paul, now the proud owner of a punctured and inflated limp potato sack of a lung, has found this out for herself for the very first time.
Back on the plane, the two doctors notice she's dramatically different. Her functioning arm grips the armrest with an inhumane strength. She is hyperventilating, speaking in one-word sentences, and gasping for air. The doctors look at each other with fear in their eyes. Who was going to do something first?
Wait a gosh dang second. Don't planes pressurize their cabins when we fly? It's not like we're suffocating when we're up there, you know.
While airplanes do try to compensate for these problems, they don't go all the way.
While air pressure on Earth is 760 millimeters of mercury, most planes pressurize their cabins to about 565, the equivalent to what you'd feel standing at an altitude of 8,000 feet, the approximate height of Mount Olympus or Mount St. Helens. If you were to measure your oxygen content with a pulse ox while standing here, your oxygen level would only be about 90 to 93%, versus the usual healthy 100% on land. Unfortunately, that 90 to 93% is exactly what you feel and experience while standing on a pressurized plane.
All right, sorry guys, it's Paul. She wanted to remind us that she's dying and to kind of, move on with the story. No time for this science nonsense. Okay, here we go. That's the stuff. Okay, so she's getting much worse. One doctor springs to action and puts an oxygen mask right on her face, but the measly flow of air barely even tickles her nose hairs. The other doctor notices something strange in Paul's neck. The outline of her windpipe was significantly deviated to the right. Paul can no longer speak at all. She is drenched in sweat. With a singular focus, every muscle fiber in her body strains in an attempt to pull in more air.
Unfortunately, with each breath she takes, she actually makes things worse. Her main problem isn't really an oxygenation problem. Fundamentally, it's a pressure problem. To understand this, you have to realize that the other thing about living on the Earth's surface is that there ends up being a crap ton of air molecules above us, like standing at the bottom of a deep Olympic pool. All that weight above exerts a real and meaningful force. You don't notice and get crushed into a piece of salami because you've been training in this baby all your life.
Damn you, so.
That all changes when you're up in the sky, though. Up in the sky, any trapped gas in your body will expand and take up as much as a 38% more space. Wait a minute. Does that matter to the story? Where do we have trapped gas in our body anyway? I'm glad you asked, Chumbuk. Have you ever noticed all these weird issues in your ears when you fly? The sounds are muffled and your ears feel full. Why is this? Deep in your head, in the back of your eardrum, is a tiny, closed-off space connected only to the world by something called a eustachian tube. It connects the back of your ears to your throat, amazingly. Sometimes, though, this tube gets clogged off, trapping a bunch of air literally inside of your head. You can probably imagine why this would be uncomfortable, especially on a plane when the gas expands and there's nowhere to go. To solve this, you pinch off your nose in an attempt to force air out. You activate your diaphragm and you push a reservoir of air out of your lungs. Normally, this new gush of air would stream out of your nostrils, but because you closed off the exits, you divert all that air through the eustachian tube. Those passageways become pressurized and burst open, allowing the trapped gas to escape, relieving your ear congestion. You also have trapped air in your boot. By a similar process, by activating your core muscles, you self-pressurize and force that trapped gas outside through that amazing thing called the butthole. Yes, we all fall for more on planes. It's not just you or that partially giant bean enchilada that you had trying to have a conversation with your seat cushion. It's just the physics of trapped gas expanding, plain and simple. For Paula, though, having a fart was the least of her worries. Now that her lung was punctured, trapped gas dangerously existed inside where it should never belong, inside of her chest cavity in what is known as the pleural space. Though the lung was uselessly deflated like a limp potato sack, its punctured site continued to function as a one-way valve, spewing more and more air into this normally closed-off space with nowhere to escape. The expanding gas grows larger and pushes against the damaged lung. Both ribs act as an unfortunate and unyielding bony cage. In a few moments, the gas will crush the rest of her organs too. The sensation of being choked from the inside is a curious thing. Paul had no words to describe it. She literally could not speak.
It was this pressure that pushed Paul's windpipe completely to the side of her neck. In a few moments, that same pressure would crush her heart. The usual 5 liters pumped from the heart every minute would now be completely choked off to a mere trickle. Surgery was needed, right now. So the doctors got to work. There's no time to move Paul from her seat. Her economy seat was converted to a surgical amphitheater. The nearby passengers and flight attendants looked on with silent, morbid curiosity. Heated hand towels were used to make a sterile field. As you now realize, the only way to save Paul is to figure out a way to relieve that pressurized gas inside of her chest. In other words, you need a hole. You need a hole for that gas to come out of. What's the quickest way to make a hole? That's right, you need to stab her. Rarely is stabbing someone in the chest the correct treatment for any particular ailment you may have, but here we are.
Oh, you have a fever and a headache? Just, take 2 pills, stab yourself in the chest every other day, and call it a day. You should feel better.
Apart from the obvious ways in which this could go wrong, there's one other glaring problem with this solution. One stab is rarely enough. Even in an emergency room with tools designed to treat this very thing, the first stab is often just a temporary solution, done to buy the patient a few seconds more time, more life, for the doctor to dissect down into the chest cavity, creating a hole now large enough to stick multiple fingers through. Why do you need such a big hole anyway? That's a good question. When you puncture a small hole in a cardboard box, for example, the hole stays there just fine, but humans aren't nice cardboard boxes. We're messy, squishy, bleeding slabs of meat. Puncture a human with a small hole, and the tissues and fat ooze back into place, closing off that newly made hole. Well, having a bigger hole helps with this issue. The problem is, the only real way to treat this is to actually stent that hole open and to prevent it from closing off completely. In the medical world, this fancy spangled device is literally just called a chest tube. I know, very imaginative. It's literally just a rigid plastic tube with holes in it. But as simple as that may sound, do you think the doctors were lucky enough to find such a thing? A sterile, rigid chest tube of the correct size and length, 40,000 feet in the air? Was it just in some random lady's purse? No, but they did build one. The doctors rummage through the airplane's medical kit and they find a flexible tube. It's actually a urinary catheter, a kind of tube that helps people pee when they get blockages in their urinary tract. People that have that love these things. Just kidding. Nobody really loves these things, but they do get the job done. You want the tube to be soft and rubbery when you're trying to jam it up someone's pee hole, but not so much when you're trying to jam it through someone's chest, especially through a hole you just created. What you need is something a little bit more rigid, so this flimsiness had to be remedied. Enter the first life-saving miracle tool, the coat hanger. The doctors bend and fashion the flexible metal into a trocar and place it within the catheter to give it an increased strength and shape. 5-star brandy again is poured over this new concoction to disinfect it. By the way, I love how the published case report specifically notes the quality of the brandy used. Would they have used a 4-star brandy if that's all they had? I mean, I don't know, but talk about serendipity. The doctors now beam at their new invention, but their conversation about patents is rudely interrupted by Paul's dying gasps. Scalpel and scissors were located at this moment from the medical kit and used to blunt dissect the muscles and fat away from the ribcage to create a large enough passageway, a hole. The catheter coat hanger is now inserted deep into the recesses of her chest. Sounds like a painful procedure, right? No, all they had at their disposal was a tiny 10cc ampule of local anesthetic. I don't think the people who made this medical kit, this first aid thing, had a, dying patient needs a hole in her chest ASAP kind of situation in mind. An audible whoosh of air is heard coming out of the tube as it is shimmied into position. A new tube now connected the inner depths of Paul's chest cavity with the outside environment. While any trapped gas could now escape, air from the environment could also now go inside of her chest as well. Thus, the problem lay unfinished. Enter the second life-saving tool, a bottle of water. Paul was very thirsty. She was thirsty to live. Dying is difficult business. 2 holes are punctured in the top of the bottle. The doctor pushes oxygen tubing through one of these holes and connects the other end of the tubing to the original makeshift chest tube. The water acts as a one-way valve to allow air to bubble out of the liquid like a carbonated beverage, but becomes an impenetrable barrier in the other direction. The second hole in the water bottle acts as a vent to allow air to escape into the environment. So long as the tubing was submerged in this beverage, air was not going to go back inside of Paul's chest cavity. Brilliant! The third life-saving tool now, sticky Scotch tape, or at least the British equivalent. It is used to secure all the connection points in this new contraption they made. Thus, in the next 2 minutes, this beverage becomes a bubbling cauldron of wonder. As the trapped air begins to leak out, Paul's lungs begin to reinflate. By the 5-minute mark, she is almost fully recovered and resting comfortably in her seat. The case report notes that at this point, she settles down to enjoy her first meal of the night. Back to that meatloaf, huh? And that is how 2 doctors end up saving the life of a woman for the very first time. The doctors retire to their seats, and they collapse in exhaustion, only to be again summoned by the flight attendant a 3rd time.
It's Polly, unfortunately. Yeah, she kinda looks bad.
The doctors curse under their breaths. God damn it, Paul, stop freaking dying, why don't ya? They rush to her seat, but she's not there.
No, she's in the bathroom.
Flight attendant yells out.
There.
There, they find Paul sitting on a toilet seat with her pants at her ankles, pale as a ghost. Again, she reports severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. The doctor's first instinct is to check the thing that they just made. What do you know? Where is it? It's actually perched on a high shelf in the middle of the bathroom. And they realize all the water had siphoned out of the tube and into her chest. Amazing! Paul, so that's what happens when you pour an entire bottle's worth of water inside a hole in your chest. What groundbreaking scientific research. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your contributions to mankind's knowledge. The doctors place the water bottle on the floor below her now, and soon the water drains out and refills the plastic bottle. Air bubbles out of her chest with each cough, and after a few more minutes, she's almost back to normal again. And that is how 2 doctors end up saving the life of a woman for the 2nd time. Paul Dixon would have likely figured out another way to torment our doctors and try and die a 3rd time if given the chance, but the plane promptly lands at Heathrow in London at this moment, and she's immediately whisked off the plane and taken to a hospital. There, she's diagnosed with rib fractures and a 30% residual left-sided pneumothorax, a medical term for a collapsed lung. She is treated with an actual chest tube this time, given IV antibiotics, pain medication, and a tetanus booster. She eventually makes a full recovery. 3 weeks later, Paul flies back to Hong Kong to marry the man who started it all. The same man who threw her off the motorcycle, in fact. She says she cannot wait to marry this man, and also to ride that motorcycle again. Even though she's not scared of riding, she does report a slight phobia to coat hangers. And that, my friends, is how surgery can be done in the back of the plane, 40,000 feet in the air. Hope you enjoyed this story, and now feel ready to save your very own Paul Dixon when the time comes too. Okay guys, that's it. Hope you liked the story. This was actually the first YouTube video I've made. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you want to hear more. There'll be a lot of other cool things coming up in the future. If you want to hear more stuff like this, just remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and yeah, stay tuned.
Okay.